Oh, welcome everyone. Thank you all for being here. It is Friday, so feel free to have yourself a beverage if you're of age, and get your lunch out. We're all family here, right? So welcome again. I want to start by acknowledging the land that most of us are here on, McMinnville. Is traditional territory of the Yamhill Band of the Kalapuya, and right now I know a lot of us we're covered in smoke, so I hope everyone, their families, and everyone just is doing okay. And I'll pass it over to Jane.
Oh, okay. Well, welcome back to this Cat Chat. As you guys know, we do this every Friday at noon. This is our space to have a community conversation and just stay in dialogue together about various different experiences and perspectives across our campus and in our community so that we can better understand and better support each other. We want to start out also by acknowledging that it is 9/11, and thank you to all those people who have served our country. In particular, thank you to Dr. Davis, who has also served. And then also want to set the ground rules again for this conversation, that we're fortunate to have Jen joining us today. And as always, the context for this is that we're here to listen, we're here to share respectfully, and we're here to give space to the voices that we don't often get to hear. So with that, if you have any questions that you want to ask, feel free to use the chat. You can send them to us, to Lindsay or Kibbs or me through the chat, and then we can ask those questions for you if you'd prefer not to speak them out loud yourself, or feel free to ask Jen any questions too. But I will, Jen will be on for the first part of our conversation, and then we'll have a Q&A when she goes back to lounging. So
to doing the hard work, right?
That's right.
You can't lie nowadays and be like, I have appointments out. You're like, no, you don't. You do. You're at home. Your appointments are at home. Don't lie that you're leaving the house.
Totally. So thank you from everyone here in athletics. Thanks for joining us today. And John, we'll let you go ahead and do the honors.
I'm Coach John Willis. I'm here to introduce a great friend of mine. I think if you took intelligence, awesomeness, and badass and put it in a blender, Jen Fry is what you get out. So I appreciate all of your work. You can find her at jenfrytalks.com. She is an inspiration to a generation of people. So I am thankful to have her as a friend and for her to be here with us today.
I appreciate you given me this space, and I feel like I always feel very honored and humbled that people want me to come and chat with y'all about these tough subjects. So yeah, I'm really here to kind of chat with you about this. Whatever you want to talk about, questions, let me know.
Perfect. Jen, will you start out by giving us just a little bit of your background? We know you were a college athlete, but can you tell us just your own progression of what your experience was like as an athlete and what brought you to the work that you're doing today?
Yeah, it's kind of interesting because my experience as an athlete versus the work I do now are polar opposites. So I grew up in Arizona, 5 minutes from the Mexican border, where the best Mexican food is. You know, my volleyball coach was a Black female, my track coach was a Black male, my soccer coach was a Latinx male. So I always grew up around people who looked like me. My teams had many people of color on them. So that was very normal. I actually have a weird experience that all of my volleyball coaches were all women. So had that experience, which I know that's rare, through high school and college. And so from that, I coached college. I coached for 15 years all over the US. I coached at Washington State, coached at Illinois, when we played for a national championship in 2011. And like I tell everyone, we lost to UCLA and I will forever hate them. Like I'm like, I dislike you. Like, we lost a national championship. I can't be nice. Like, I'm always bitter at them. And the funniest part is my last speaking engagement in March was UCLA. And I literally emailed Kenny. I was like, Kenny, I hate you all. I'm going to be transparent. He was like, Jen, we watch your TED Talk, so we know how much you don't like us. And I was like, oh, Kenny. I said, but if I see that national championship trophy, I'm going to throw it in the ocean. Like, I better not even see it. And the funniest part is yesterday, UCLA basketball coach called me to come speak to our athletes. And I was like, oh, UCLA, you're always around. But coach there, I coached at Elon for 4 years, and being at a very, very predominantly white space, I started to notice the interactions and the experiences of my athletes of color. And that kind of made me start thinking a little bit more broadly of what are they like here? What's their experience? What their day-to-day? And then also seeing that our department was very white, and even football had one black coach. And I was thinking, like, a football player could go through the day and not have any interaction with a person of color, and that's really problematic. And so it just got me wanting to think more about it. And I really, after about 15 years, I literally just quit. I kind of had an idea of what I wanted to do. Are there any students on here? Raise your hand if you're. Let me tell you, you will not know what you're going to want to do. I am 40. Okay. So people be like, well, I know when I graduate, I'm going to do this for 3 years. That shit don't work. Like, it never does. You got to figure out what you're going to figure out. Like, give yourself grace, because so many athletes are like, oh my God, or students are like, oh my gosh, I want to do this and it's not working out. It will never work out. Like, it's super random. And I literally just quit. My mom was like this, and I was like, we're going to figure it out. And I knew kind of what I wanted to do. I felt like what I wanted to hear being talked about and the topics weren't being talked about the way I wanted them to. So I was like, I'm just going to create that space to do it. And I feel like many times people wait for like someone to do something. Like, don't be the waiter. Don't be like, well, I have this idea and I'll just wait. Don't wait for anybody. Be like, I have this idea. I'm going to see if this is going to work. And you might fail. You'll take some L's, and then like it will happen. But like especially if you're a woman, like, never wait. Don't ever wait, because somebody will snatch up your idea and be like, look at this great idea I got. So like, never ever wait. And so I just quit, and I was like, I'm gonna figure it out. If I have to, I'll substitute teach, or I'll do, like, I don't know. And so I left. I worked at Duke for 3 years, and while I was working at Duke, I just was kind of working more about like what I wanted to do with D&I. I was doing speaking engagements and really just figuring it out. And I got a second master's. And then from that point, I felt like, I was like, I don't even know why, but I was like, I feel like my speaking career is going to blow up. Like, I was like, I feel like it is. Let me just create some space. So I quit that. And I'm actually a full-time PhD student working on my PhD in geography at Michigan State. So I'm looking at the racial experiences of professional Black volleyball players overseas. Again, I had a very weird path to a PhD. Many times it's like, I'll answer that. That's a very good question. Here's why. I knew I wanted to talk about. I want to talk about the racial experiences of professional Black volleyball players overseas. I said, who's going to pay me to do that? I don't care. I don't care if it's under forestry. I don't care if it's under engineering. I literally was like, who's going to pay me to do the work I want to do? And that's very weird, because most times it's like you find a person you want to work under, and then you mold your PhD to what they want you to do. And I was like, I know the area, I have my data set, I have the relationships. Like, all I need is someone to pay me, and then just to let me do what I want to do. And so the way I got into my PhD is really weird, because one of my best friends, her mom is Black, and her mom got her bachelor's and master's in geography at Michigan State and her PhD at UNC. And Danielle was like, why don't you talk to my mom about the PhD program at Michigan State? Like, they're doing this new like diversity initiative. I'm like, geography? What? I don't know anything about geography. I'm not doing that. So I talked to her mom. We had a great conversation. She's like, they're doing this new program called Advancing Geography Through Diversity. So they actively recruit cohorts of Latinx, Black, and Native people. And I talked to the recruiter, had a great relationship. I also applied to sociology, sports studies, and justice, like all these random programs that I looked at people who maybe were doing the work and just was like, we'll see. And so geography actually ended up being the best place, because they give me the space. I mean, I'm literally running this business full time. I'm taking a lot of the classes I want to take that fit in with my major and what I want to do and my business. And I have a ton of support. And so it's just worked out really well. So that's what I do right now. I'm taking 3 classes full time, as well as running this business.
Holy moly. That's a lot. That's a lot.
Just a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah. Good for you. So I know that from NCAA, you did a webinar for the NCAA in Victoria, and yep, which was amazing. It was such a good one to listen to. And we'll find the link and put it in the chat, because it was so, love the way that you two handle people's questions, where people could just come forth with questions from like a complete space of whatever we know is whatever we know. And I'm just going to put this out here. And you guys were like, yeah, we got that. And so I just absolutely love that. When we know from working in an NCAA institution that retention of student athletes of color is the lowest, and particularly for Black women. That they tend to feel the most disenfranchised from, disconnected from their sport. They're playing their sport, but they're not always feeling totally connected to the larger department and to the school as a whole. Can you talk a little bit about that, about what you have seen as far as those trends in retention and engagement, particularly with student athletes of color, and what work you've done around that with helping schools?
Yeah, well, the interesting part is that they're the most disenfranchised, but if you look at the data, they're also graduating at the highest rate, especially among minority groups. Like Black women are graduating at the highest. So they're doing their stuff, and they're doing it through a lot of trauma. And because they're doing well and graduating, people aren't acknowledging their trauma. Because how can you get trauma when you're graduating, you have a high GPA, you're we don't understand. You know, we're looking for the lowest hanging fruit of the people who aren't graduating, who aren't being retained. That's who they look for. They're not looking at the people who are Black women who are graduating at the highest rates. And so I think that's the number one problem, is thinking the people that are doing the work don't need the help. And so separating both of them and saying, just because you're graduating doesn't mean you're not feeling trauma and you don't need the help. So I think that's the biggest thing we have to ask. Are we assuming that our Black women don't have trauma because they're graduating? So that to me should be your first question. And I don't think that that's many times a question that's asked. So that I think would be the first question. The second question I would honestly ask is, what is the effect of white women on these Black women? Because many times that's not talked about. Whiteness within academia is not talked about. The effect of whiteness in academia is not talked about. And so that is an effect because, you know, the data shows it's going to be white men and then white women who are being most of the professors, most of the people in higher positions. So that's who they're going to be interacting with most. So what's that exchange and experience like? And we don't look into that. And so I would say that those are probably the two things that you need to take a look at is, are we not giving support because they're graduating? And what are their experiences with white women? Because a lot of people think that because they're women, there should be a connection, not understanding that intersectionality, and still saying because of that intersectionality, we need to understand what their experiences are like when they're going and talking to white women.
Jen, I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit more about that being kind of trauma informed, because I'm not sure that everyone maybe, I don't think the general population understands necessarily what I mean, because I think a lot of people that hear trauma, they think like, oh, I've been in a car accident kind of thing, you know? So can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, the trauma of microaggressions, the trauma of your experiences being ignored, the trauma of your experiences not being validated, the trauma of Black girls, or Black students will say, talking to white women, and then the trauma there of having to tread on eggshells because you don't want to be seen as the aggressor, you don't want to be seen as making a white woman cry, like that type of trauma. The trauma of being in class and being one of a very few and always having to be on the defensive in case any problematic comments come up because your professors aren't going to say something about it. The trauma of just walking around while Black and worrying about the location you're going to be at. You know, am I walking through an area that I'm going to be name called? Is this a party that is going to be super problematic for me as a Black woman? Like all of that trauma that is just continually hitting you in different ways that many times is easily ignored and especially discounted. Not just ignored, but very much discounted.
Absolutely. And we talked a little bit about like what do you see the bigger challenges of athletic departments specifically, beyond just maybe being majority white male or majority white staff, and trying to better understand the kids they're working with. Students. I don't like to say kids.
Yeah, I don't think you can discount like the whiteness of the athletic department and how much of it is money being made on the bodies of Black and brown people. I think we can't discount that. We have to put it all together. Because that's one of the biggest problems is that we're seeing, you know, our basketballs, our footballs are doing so much to really hold these departments up. And then we see these football coaches it's like, I think the data says like 80 to 85% white. So you got someone that's making $10 million off of Black and brown bodies. They're going to want stuff going, you know, their departments are making so much. So I think it really is of athletic departments, because athletic departments are a microcosm of everything else, right? The data of athletic departments is the same data of a university, is the same data of a organization, is the same data of a K through 12. Like everything it's just a microcosm. And so the question really is how, like, I really think it starts with like, how can we start looking at funding athletic departments in different ways so that athletes aren't the brunt of the money? And I mean, because a lot of times it's like, well, we can do more recruiting of Black and brown coaches and staff and administrators. But the reality is that we have to look at this being a super long game. It's a really, really long game. And so many people want a quick fix, that's it, versus saying this game is this is a 3, 5, 6, 7, 8 year process. Because we have to see, why is our culture not inclusive, that Black and brown people don't want to get hired and they don't want to stay? Because many times people use the excuse of, well, we don't pay a lot. Look, most of athletics doesn't pay a lot. But if there are athletic departments that are getting these people to feel safe, secure, included, the area around them is a place that they can go without being in too much fear, people are going to come and be hired. But why am I going to go work for low pay in a place where I can't say anything? There's people who don't look like me. My experiences aren't validated. I'm being tokenized. Well, I'm not going to do all that and get low pay. So I think many times when people say, you know, it's low pay, no, people will work for pennies. Like, let's be honest. Athletics is not a money-making venture. So the question is, what is everything else that will say it's worth it for me to come and get this experience and not be paid a lot?
Absolutely.
To kind of follow up with that too, Jen, thanks for being with us. I just wanted to also kind of get down to some of the like action steps. You know, last week we talked with a lot of our students, or 2 weeks ago, who they're saying, you know, I'm tired of talking about everything. I'm tired of having to like relive our experiences. What do you suggest are like action steps just for our immediate athletic department that coaches can be doing to, you know, help create, you know, I don't know, make the environment more conducive to everyone, more inclusive, you know, in such a predominantly white environment? Does that make sense?
Have you asked the athletes that?
Yeah. And one of our issues too was, you know, we don't want to have, like, as their leaders and people that guide them, we don't want them to have to come up with the answers. Obviously, we want to work with them with any ideas that they may have, of course. But I think that they're also somewhat at a loss with how, you know, again, like you said, it's a long game. So it's not like it's going to be easy to do things within a week or two, but, you know, just trying to think of like the big picture.
But that's the thing, I think, of telling them, like, we're not putting the weight on you, but we also want to know what you want from this so we can work together. Because again, you don't want to be people like, okay, we've heard this, these are things we think, and it's nothing of what they want. And now they're even more pissed off, right? Yeah. Because it's something that you're like, well, this is what we think you want. And they're like, we don't want that. So really coming at them with like saying, hey, you know, we want to make sure that our action steps forward are what you want. And we're also being, you know, understanding that we're not putting the weight on you. We don't want that. So let us know, like, how can we work together to say that this is a 3, 4, 5 year plan, that most likely the things that you really want to see aren't going to happen till year 3. But what are things in the immediate future that can help you have a better experience? What are qualitative things? Quantitative. What are quantitative things that we could say, these are things that we are doing to show the progress you want? Because many times, and I get it, like athletes are like, they want something like it's emotional to them. And I'm like, well, I understand that. We want to be able to show you we're doing this work, you know, because I think one school, it was like, well, we don't, you know, we want the coaches to stop victim blaming. Well, what does that mean? Like, let's dive into the nuance of what do we mean by that, and what educational stuff can we do to help them? And so that's what I'm saying, like very quantitative stuff of like, these are measures that we want to see in place that we can start moving forward with.
Do you have any other like examples with other institutions you've worked with that have had some of these type of examples and things that they've done to move forward and improve their?
It's tough because every institution is different, and the problems that they've had have made them maybe have to move forward in a different and faster way, right? And so that's the biggest thing, is like every institution is so different. And so to say, like, listening to them and keeping them involved and saying, hey, from listening, these are 3 steps we feel like we can do better. Educate our coaches. I don't know, like these are 3 things, listening to what you said, because what they might say of that their needs are could be totally different from another school. And so like from listening to you, these are 3 things that we think can move forward, that we can actually say yes or no that we've done. What are your thoughts on them? Are these what you want? Yes or no? What tweakings do you want? That type of stuff. What would you say were like the top 2 things that the athlete said were the biggest problem?
I think first and foremost that comes to my mind, Natalie, feel free to pop in too, but just like not seeing other people like them. Or no, I would also say like their peers just not understanding their trauma and history and just kind of assuming everyone's under the same umbrella.
So yeah, so you might say our first session is going to be, we're going to do an educational session with the coaches, and then also educational session with the student athletes. But like you have to have a deep, we need to acknowledge that sometimes students don't know what they don't know. Yeah, 100%. Like these are still like 18 to 23-year-olds who don't know shit. Like I'm 40 and I don't know shit. And I'm in this social linguistics class. I am the worst person on the top court. Like I legit am the person shanking balls, like shooting the balls, going like over stuff. Like I am the worst person in this class. And we'll be in this discussion and I'm just like, and they're like, you have any questions? I'm like, I don't even know what to ask. I mean, I don't know. And so 100%. And so educate, like really starting the education top down with your administration, your coaches, staff, every single person is going to get this education. That's the first way to show is like, we are vested in educating those who are in power. Like that's our first thing. Then when we talk about educating our student athletes, of not just like an hour, but like we're going to do, like I know with some schools I'm doing like 2 hour, 15-minute, like really in-depth starter sessions to get them critically thinking, you know, and that's your goal is like, I want to give them some baseline of education, but more importantly, I want them to start critically thinking about data, information, themselves, the world around them. Like, how can I get them critically analyzing? How can I get them asking our professors, hey, you know, how many people of color are we learning from? You know, and I had to do that with one of my classes. We have human geography. We have 5 students. 4 of them are Black, 1's Asian. And we have 3 of the 4 books we're reading are Black people. And I said, well, can we read about like an Asian interaction with environment to get that? And she's like, yeah. And so many professors don't even think about really decolonializing and really putting diverse speakers on their syllabus because they never learned about them, to be, I mean, honest. You know, these dissertation committees are predominantly going to be all white. And so, you know, getting your athletes to think in that mindset of saying like, hey, you know what, how many people of color are we reading about? And getting them to start asking and like advocating for themselves and having those conversations. And that's what I mean, like, you know, when I give these definitions, I always tell people like, you have to start, really understanding that when you have power, you can define anything. People in power can literally define anything. And so asking yourself, when we look at definitions, who defined it? Who was, who had the power to define it? Whose voice was obviously not heard? And so getting your athletes to think in a more critical lens, which coaches, you need to understand that also means that they're going to be questioning you. And I think coaches don't want that. It's like, question everything else, but not me. And so coaches have to be willing to say, this is why I run this offense. This is why I run this defense. This is why I do this. This is why I do that. This is why I have this rule in my handbook. And maybe it's time for me to rethink this rule because it's actually disproportionately affecting athletes of color. And that's what questioning is. Because I mean, let's be honest, when we talk about like raising girls, we want them to be hard-headed. We want them to be bossy. But most times you don't want them to be it with you if that's your daughter, right? Like, I want you to be strong-willed, just not with me. And so how can we make it like, I understand that if I'm asking them to be strong-willed, it's also going to be, they're going to be giving me pushback. And I have to be able to show my other coaches and my athletes how we handle disagreement and conflict and do it in a way where we can keep going versus it stopping everything.
Awesome. Any other questions that you guys, students, do you have any questions? This is your chance to ask a professional.
Hi, Jen, I got one. I listened to our students the other week too, is finding someone they can go to, you know, and talk to, someone safe and or a safe place. Just, you know, they feel the trauma and they're suddenly in a place where they don't know where to go or who to talk to.
Yeah, so I think this is a perfect time to start building relationships. If you have a cultural center, looking at your Black and brown faculty and staff, maybe having like, you know, a virtual welcome thing where, you know, hey, these are staff and faculty around campus that are also, that look like you, you know, and I think those partnerships are really big and that helps you out. You know, is saying, hey, you know, we're making these partnerships so that our Black females have this person to come talk to, you know, and that type of thing. But also acknowledging that they're going to have a long weight on themselves as well. And it's like a double-edged sword. And so but I also think it's where you really develop strong relationships with them so that they realize, they understand that they're not just being tokenized, you know, of like, you're Black, here, send this Black person versus like, she is doing that major and we think she'd really fit with you. But that's also from developing that partnership. That's the biggest thing, is they know that like you're coming from a place of you want as a partner to help this Black athlete or brown athlete, not like I'm just throwing them on you. It also, y'all know free gear helps a lot. T-shirts, sweatshirts, like that helps out a lot with talking to people. Oh, thank you for talking to our Black female. Here's a T-shirt. That builds a lot of partnership.
Yep, free swag.
Mm-hmm.
Jackson, what do you want to explain what you're talking about here?
Yeah, just going back to Jen's comment earlier that I really appreciated about how Black female athletes so often get overlooked, you know, maybe due to high graduation rates or success in other areas and discounting the trauma. I had the privilege to attend a seminar earlier this year that Dr. Alicia Moreland-Capella at OHSU, she's a trauma-informed care specialist, where she talked about racism as trauma. And I thought some of you might be interested in the PowerPoint file from that. So that's what I shared there. But yeah, I really appreciated that point, Jen. That's a really important point and something that we have to try to address.
Yeah, and I think the thing also is we have to kind of look at it as like Jenga. You know, I was listening to a podcast about like Black mortality rates, and they gave a really good example of like, why is like this, you know, Black mortality rate for Black women like 3.5 times higher than white women. And it was like, imagine Jenga, and every single time something is happening, it's another block being taken out every single time. And then it gets to be a point where you're uneven, and now it affects you. And think about that with our Black women, of the Black trauma that they're consistently having to face at all times in all different ways, and how it just wears on the body, wears on the mind, wears on the spirit.
Absolutely. And Jen, I'm guessing that there's been, and tell us when you need to go because I don't want to take advantage of your time, but I was just wondering, because I feel like we have a very, a big, you know, it's majority white population from all the way down, even our athletes and our students as well. But I feel like there's certain even students who they they feel like they well they don't want to get political, or they don't feel like they have time to like really either educate themselves, or just they think that they don't want to like kind of wade into these controversial topics, like, and I'm wondering how you've dealt with that, if you've seen that kind of just, I don't even know how to describe that feeling of like, well, maybe like this doesn't affect us, or this doesn't affect me. How do I work with that?
I think the first thing to tell them is everything is political. Everything. The beauty of race and whiteness has been to show that it's not political, right? It's been made it to seem that when only Black people talk about it, now it's a political thing, versus like race is a political thing. Everything we do is political. The educational system is political because money is being siphoned in out. So I think we need to change our lens and be like, everything is political. Everything you do is political. There is not one thing that you do that is not political. And the quicker we understand that, the quicker we can change that mindset. But what's people have done is that they've made it seem that if you're talking about race, it's political, because whiteness has been able to pull race away to make it only seem like a Black and brown thing versus an everybody thing. Race has made it to seem like whiteness is the foundation, everything else is different. And if you're complaining about everything else, then you're really not the norm. And so really to switch out that mindset, like I said, like everything, like name one thing that isn't political. Everything. From when the garbage is picked up to where you live, what you're taught, who you hang around with, what you buy, what you wear, what you eat, what you drink. Like there is literally nothing that isn't political. And so to get people to think in a different mind that while you're saying this doesn't affect me, it is affecting you. It just hasn't affected you negatively. That's really what you mean. It just hasn't affected you negatively. Yeah. Education is political. Neutrality in the classroom shortchanges students. Absolutely. Like this idea of like, I'm objective, like no one's objective. On my webinar yesterday, I was like, you tell me one thing that you think that is objective, like literally one thing. And what people went to was like, the time on the microwave is not objective. If you put 5 minutes, it's 5 minutes. Like that's where we had to go for objectiveness. Was like stuff like, because anything that's interaction with a person is not objective. Even they're like, well, running a race on a track. I'm like, well, that's political if there's like wind, like, and also who gets to be on that track is political, right? Like there's not something that isn't political, isn't objective. Like everything is subjective. And so I think when we start framing it that way, we can start getting people to think critically, because right now everyone thinks that there's objectiveness and that you can be neutral. Well, I'm objective. I'm like, no, you can't. You can't be neutral with stuff. It's impossible. And as long as professors teach from that lens, then we have to do a lot of shifting versus a teacher saying, hey, we're reading these history books, but also understand that there are these lenses to this as well. And getting people to understand that there's multiple lenses to everything. There's multiple truths that we never really explore the truth from the marginalized perspective, right? History is always written by the victors, and that's the perspective we're always reading. We're not reading about the marginalized perspective, because if we read about the marginalized perspective, then there's going to be a lot of shifting, and people are like, well, you're just trying to change the definition. I'm like, I'm not trying to change it. I'm trying to get you to realize that the definition of racism you're using was written in 1902 during lynching, during segregation. Like, I just need you to cognitively think about that and to really think questionably about everything. That's what I want you to do. Like, if you don't like my definition, cool. But if you're not defining privilege and power and all these things in it, then you're not really looking at the best thing. And so getting people to think in a more critical lens that there is no objectiveness, there is no fact, none of that exists.
And even in sports, right? I think we like to think like, oh, well, the score, or the 40 time, or all these things that like, these are objective things, but really it's not. It's still, there's so many factors that go into those things.
Yep, exactly.
Yeah, that's great.
Students, you have no questions. Y'all can't be on here silent. I'm gonna remove you. Can I remove people from here?
Yes.
I don't even know if I have the power. I don't have the power, but I'll find a way.
We'll give you the power.
I just unmuted one of them. Go ahead, Kenya.
Oh no. Okay, now I'm on the spot about this. I guess this would be just more centered on like your personal experience with
That's
you
fine.
talking about growing up in Arizona and then now being able to travel, I guess, across the US for different reasons, but through athletics or just aside from athletics, when was the first time your ethnicity was like you were self-aware of your ethnicity and from the perspective of other people in the sense of like identity being half how you perceive yourself and half of how other people perceive you?
You know, that's such a difficult question for me because I grew up in a majority city. Like and my mom was white. Like it's so hard because I remember instances like getting on the bus and being called the N-word by a bunch of Hispanic people, you know, or I remember helping my mom. I used to help this person in a wheelchair. And I remember my mom came in the store and she like grabbed me for something. I was like, lady, don't grab me. I don't know you. And she's this white woman. And, you know, all of a sudden, like you see like the police coming. And I remember instances like that. But for me, like fully understanding what it means to be a Black woman and how I look at myself and how others look at me. I mean, really, it didn't start until like my 30s until I started to, I mean, I went to school in Alabama. I had a fabulous experience. Like all of these places where people would usually have like the red flags, I didn't have any. And so that's why for me, maybe as a Black female, it took a little longer to understand not only who I was, but like what I wanted to do with who I was.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I see Spencer on the call too, if he wants to say hi.
Who's on the call?
Spencer Lee.
Oh yeah.
Or Kalia. I don't want to put you guys on the spot, but I'm putting you on the spot. Spencer's having some phone issues. Gotcha.
Sorry, I was in another call for a second, so I missed like the last few minutes. What are we talking about right now? Sorry.
No, you're good. We're just trying to see if there's any questions for Jen, additional questions. And wasn't sure if you had any.
Yeah, here, sorry, I was in back-to-back meetings, so I was on lunch, but now I'm back. Hi, Jen.
Hi.
Yeah, I thought one thing that you're talking about at the beginning was growing up, having the experience of being around a lot of people who look like you, especially in sports. And I grew up doing track and cross country here in Oregon. So my experience is being literally the only, usually person of color, but usually only Black girl on the track and on the course and everything. And I guess my question for you then would be like, that's kind of, I think, how a lot of people here are at Linfield. They are usually looked at as people who are typically good at sports. But when you come to Linfield, you're surrounded by people who are white. So how do you suggest people who are student athletes here kind of balance that identity issue? Because I did come from a school where I wasn't the only person of color, and then I came here and then I felt like I was. So how do you suggest students balance that identity issue that they may face?
I mean, I think it's finding their community of people that they can talk to about these issues. Because I think one of the hardest problems is not having people that you can really talk to. That you're on a full white team and you have to kind of like, oh no, it's not bothering me, when it really is. And if you really want to try and bring it up, then it's like, oh, you know, why are you bringing up this race stuff? You know, we all love you and all that. So I think finding a community that can help them. And I think also the onus is on the coaches to get their team more comfortable talking about race so they can see maybe what areas that their team isn't inclusive of and what that means for this experience. Because I mean, it's really tough when you're the only, you know, person of color on the team and it's all white staff. And I think really all white staff just have to do a better job of, like I said, having those partnerships, having those connections, so that when a Black or brown student does come on campus, they at least immediately know who they can turn to and who's there for them. Mm-hmm. Like it literally, like I always tell people, the cultural centers, those should be on the tour, official, unofficial tours. You should have great connections and that you're walking by like this is the cultural center, you're going in, they, you know, or you're able to talk to them, see that this is the place you could go to. Like that should be the place you could go. And so I think really the onus is on the coaches of making sure that not only their team or their department, but really their school, especially a small school, is a place where there are places where those athletes can turn to.
Yeah, because like when I do share those kinds of thoughts that I have, like, yeah, this is like, it's so odd to me, and it makes me kind of uncomfortable. Like, it makes me feel a lot of pressure that I have to perform really well because I feel like I'm representing a whole identity. And I think there's a lot of pressure at that. But like when I have shared these issues that I face, then people say like, oh no, like there's a lot of Black distance runners. And I'm like, but not in this experience that a lot of people have here at Linfield. Like, yeah, you see them like at D1 schools here and there, like, you know, more professional races. And, you know, I can't speak to all sports, but from what I did see when I was a student here at Linfield, I saw that a lot. Like, you know, our basketball team, there's been a lot of times where it was like almost all white. And it's like, well, basketball, there's a lot of Black people who play. So what's your problem? You know, but it's like, it's the experience that you're facing here at Linfield. So it's a weird thing because people expect that you don't have a problem with it because maybe Black people are a lot of times in a certain sport, you know, like football or basketball, but when you come here to Linfield, that's not the case. So yeah, so thank you for that. It's just like something I've always like struggled with when I was a student athlete, and I feel for the students who are also battling that kind of identity.
Yeah, and I think that we need to put more of an onus on the coaches and administrators than we have been. I feel like we put in a lot on the other student athletes. Well, they play a part. Like the coaches and administrators are the ones who really set everything up. And like this idea of like, well, there are a lot of Black ones. Where? Like, I want you to show me. Like, I don't want you showing me like being like Google Black cross country runners. You know, like I don't want you doing that to be like, look, I found some names. Like, no, I want you to show me, because then, excuse me, you can see that the experience I'm telling you is valid. Because what you're essentially saying is that because you can Google and 10 Black cross country runners come up, that my experience is not valid. And that is like, that's just trash, you know? And so I think it really is the coaches, administrators who have to take a step back and again, understand that whiteness of their culture, of their team, that what allows them to think that that's acceptable versus saying, okay, well, we need to start doing a better job of really making it very inclusive and understand like, why are we only, there are Black cross country runners, but why are we not recruiting them? Like, what's going on? You know, what does that mean for us and what job we're doing?
This is Mike. This is Clea's former coach. And, you know, she really brings up, you know, a point for those of us that are out watching our athletes race. You know, she was third at the NCAA meet, and I wasn't looking to see if she was running against other women of color. I was watching for a purple uniform come around the track each lap. And I think when it comes down to us recruiting, our institution itself, and probably us as well, has really limited ourselves to where we recruit from. And we're recruiting from some really, really white states. And we need to look beyond our recruiting borders and do a better job of bringing a different, diverse population to campus, not just of color, but of different backgrounds. You know, like where Nat's from the East Coast, and bringing a different perspective of the human life in America to our campus.
Yeah, and I think it also is like, okay, athletic department, if you want us to do X, you're going to have to give us Y. You know, you can't expect us to do X with L. Like, that's just not going to happen. And so that's where the onus is also put on them. Like, if you want these expectations, you're going to have to help us then meet them. And what does that look like? And what does that look like long term, and having those conversations?
Yeah, no, and Jen, I think kind of what Mike said too about, thanks Mike, about like, you know, just looking for a purple uniform, or I think a lot of our coaches and even our professors, they get stuck in that, well, I treat everyone equal, I don't see color. Yeah. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Look, people got kids. I'm like, you don't even treat your kids the same. Like, let's be honest, you got your favorites. Like, no one treats their kids the same. So now you're going to say you're going to treat 3 random Black individuals and white individuals the same? It doesn't happen. And when you say that, you're discounting so much and trying to make yourself, again, seem very objective and neutral, and you're not. You make yourself then seem very subjective. Because what I tend to hear is, I treat everyone the same. I have a Black friend. Look at this Black thing, to prove that, like, I don't see it, but I do see it, versus saying like, I see everything. And, you know, whenever people say I don't see color, I'm like, but do you see disability? Or you don't see someone in a wheelchair? Like I just don't see people in wheelchairs. Like, you can't have it both ways. You can't pick one thing that you don't see, but you see everything else. Like that, then that shows even the opposite of what you're trying to say. If you're saying, I don't see this, but I see everything else.
Absolutely. And I know we're way over your 30 minutes.
Does anyone have any questions?
Jackson, I think, had a question.
Well, Natalie, you really hit on it, but I wanted to get Jen to talk about that kind of notion of equality or fairness, or like, I treat everyone the same. You'll hear that a lot. And I think sports can reinforce that in the sense that you step on the field and I'm just looking at your time around the track or how well you hit the ball or do other things. So we think we're being objective there. Do you have any other ideas? I mean, I think you've given a lot of them for how we overcome, whether it's in athletics or in classrooms, that feeling that, you know, I'm giving everybody an equal chance to run a certain time or write a paper a certain way. So I don't need to do anything else. My work is done. And I'm thinking from a coach or a professor, right, who approaches it that way.
Well, I think the reality is that no one is coming in on equal footing. So no one's coming on equal footing. And now you're trying to say that no one's coming in on it, but your institution, which is steeped in whiteness, is now going to create equity. Like that like makes no sense. And you're going to do it. And I think it's that personal thing that people don't want to acknowledge, that they have biases or stereotypes or prejudices. Like, I don't have any of those. I treat everyone the same. And it's like, you don't grade the same. You don't apply rules the same. Like, nothing is applied the same. We wish it was, but it's not. And the quicker we can say, you know what, I'm not going to treat everyone equally, but I try and be fair. And with fairness comes conversation. You know, that's the thing. And like, I'll give you an example. This is kind of a random example, but right now I'm like in a literal war with my tenant, with my landlord. Because when my mom passed away, I come back and my power had been turned off, and like all of my food rotted, and we had to throw my refrigerator out. And I tell my landlord, I'm like, this is what happened. Can you meet me halfway with food and blah, blah, blah. And he's like, no, I have a fair and equitable policy. No, you don't. Like, right away, when your tenant says my mom died, it should be like, okay, how much was food? Here you go. We'll have you a new fridge immediately. Like, that should be the end of the discussion. That's fair and equitable. It's not saying that we don't pay for food in any situation unless it's X. Like, that's not fair and equitable. It's actually unfair and unequitable, because you're assuming that everyone's coming from the same place. And that's unfair. And so I use that example to say, like, you know, people are going through a lot. I think Esperanza said, like, you know, what about COVID? Like, COVID has just jacked us all up. Like, there is no fair and equitable right now. You got people trying to do their work with kids running around, you know, like pets, like all this stuff. There's no, like, fair and equitable is out the window. It should be like just centering empathy and saying, like, you know, this is what the syllabus is, but I understand we all have stuff happening. And I think one of my professors, Dr. Patez, like, she was phenomenal, because like, I'd be like, look, I got this going on. I can't turn this paper in right now. And be like, okay, well, I'm not going to grade it for a week. Can you have it in by Friday? Okay, cool. And I understand that, because I was a professor, I was a coach, like, you always worry about the 1% who's going to screw you over, right? Well, what if this student's lying? And Bob, okay, who cares about that 1%? I don't want to screw over this 99% who really needs it, because I'm worried about this one person. Because if I make this rule now, the one person who needs it because they're worried, like, when I was in my last semester, my mom was in and out of the hospital. And so I was literally having to fly there, do class, like, you know, and I literally told my professors, and they're like, okay, just let us know how we can help you. Like, what do you need from us? And so I think if we right now lead with more empathy and be like, okay, if a person gets over on me, who cares? Like, let them get over on me. But I need to make sure I'm centering the other people, and it's not going to be equitable. And I can't think I'm equitable in this, but I'm going to try and be fair, but also acknowledge that my biases and prejudices can come up. And I need to see, okay, maybe I'm looking at this paper with a little bit of bias because I know this kid came from a lower socioeconomic area. So I'm assuming that their education is not that good. And like having a thought of that versus saying, like, I treat everyone the same. It's like, no, you don't. You don't treat your kids the same. Like, no.
Thanks, Jen.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Can you talk more on my question if time allows? Just however you want to take it. I know you mentioned a little bit of it, but like the athletes, there's so many things I read and I see and show anything that comes to mind that for you, you've been centering with this situation on COVID and athletes. Can you share that with us?
I think COVID is a phenomenal time for athletes to protest. I think it gave them a chance to see how they were being screwed. I think this was an amazing time. I'm so glad I saw that. I hope they start realizing more of their power to really change their circumstances. I hope that they understand that they have the power to really do some amazing things if they work together. I feel like the NFL players, the NBA, like yesterday, I guess the Texans played the Chiefs and like people booed. I wish those athletes would have been like, let's go, and literally just turned around and went to their locker room. Like that to me would have been powerful if like they hear the booing and they literally turn around and say, we're not playing until this place is cleaned out. That's how you make a statement of this is not acceptable. And I hope more athletes will do that, that if they go and they kneel and some fans are saying something, that it's immediately done, and they're like, we're not taking the field until those fans are removed. And I just feel like it's a great time for athletes to use their power. Like, I just feel like it's such an amazing time for that, to want things to be more equitable that they know it hasn't been. Whether it's to say, okay, I want you to show us your people of color recruiting plan. I want us to show us your accountability plan if someone says something problematic. Like asking for some stuff that make athletic departments have to really move and do things. So I think it's a really bad time, but I think it's a time that athletes can really start to use their power together.
Oh my God. And they were booing during the moment of silence for social justice. Like, that's what was so gross about it. It was just like, at first I thought it was during the anthem, and I was like, during the, like, yeah, during the moment of silence for just social justice, they were booing. It's like,
literally.
And they're the Kansas City Chiefs, and they were saying hashtag in the end zone in racism, you know, with the name. Yeah. Yeah. Exactly.
And and then they were forced to do the chop. Yep. I mean, that's the whole thing with the NFL. Now, like, you know, Roger's like, we think Colin was right. Like, y'all blackballed this shit out of him, and now you good? Like, everything with the NFL, I wish those NFL players would be like, we are not touching the field until these things happen. Because I guarantee if they do that, we will see change. But like, that's the thing of having the power. But like you said, like, okay, and racism, now do the chop, like, yeah, right. But that complete tone deafness of it is like a huge thing.
Well, I think back to your point too about coaches just need to like have some ownness over like these difficult conversations, and like you are going to be challenged, and at this point, and like with the athletes that we have, like we should be challenged, and like not to just like shut down and turn people away, but you know, I get frustrated with my own players because they challenge me on pretty much everything, but I try to like at least offer that too, so that we can have some kind of dialogue. So I can at least gain their perspective, or they can even see my perspective on like why we went with that decision or whatever. But yeah, I think that's on, you know, like we're talking about with all of the sports and athletes right now, we've got to own it and just be a little bit more vulnerable to, you know, bringing everyone in on a hard conversation.
Yeah, and also, I mean, really, it's like, I'm going to listen to your opinions, but understand I'm also the final decision.
Right.
Like, I'm going to listen. We can talk, but at the end of the day, I'm still going to be the final decision and have that. But yeah, Kendall, they, you know, they're re-including him on. Now, all of a sudden, he's the thing because he's going to make the NFL money. That's why he's going to make money on those NFL games, and that's why they're doing that. You know, it's interesting. I did a session, and someone asked me, you know, do I think Nike, when they added him and all the stuff that they're doing, was a business thing? And I was like, absolutely. They looked at the numbers and they saw that Black people spend 3 times the amount that white people spend on their Air Monarchs. Like, that was a huge business decision. And I'm like, now is it maybe more social justice when they realize they're making money? But like, it was a business decision. They played, you know, they rolled the dice with it, and they knew what was going to happen, and they were okay with that. Any other questions before I have to run?
This has been so great, Jen. Thank you so much.
Well, thanks, Jen.
No problem. Well, thank y'all. At my, my information, Jen Fry Talks, on all social media. My email is jenfrytalks@gmail.com. If you have any questions, just holler at me. I just so appreciate you having me on here to chit chat.
Thank you
Yeah.
for your time and energy. Thank you.
You're welcome.
And your
Bye,
cat,
friends.
who's amazing.
This damn cat, this is Fish right here. This is Fish Fry, this cat does not leave my side at all the time. He is right here. Welcome to my life. He is so needy.
That's great.
Bye.
Awesome.
Bye,
Thank
Jen.
you so much.
I love that her cat's named Fish Fry.
That's amazing.
For everyone else that's on, we are staying on to continue the discussion or ask questions or challenge. This is the time to challenge anything and everything, so feel free to chime in. You know, I think we'll probably stay on here about another 30 minutes or so.
I think he had to hop off, but I do have to applaud Mike Blackmore he's been on every call, and he really puts himself out there, and that's what we need, you know.
I think some of the things that Jen said too on, you know, it's just good to get her perspective from somebody who does this work every day, who's outside of, she's not tied to any particular athletic department. So she's speaking in broad terms about what we can look at. And I appreciate that input, because everyone always have to be looking at ourselves and how can we do better, and what action steps can we put in front of us. And that conversation we had last week with athletes, throwing out some ideas, it's a start. And can we, you know, as she said, can we poll our student athletes more deeply to find out what is important to them in the immediate, and can we build a long-term plan like we talked about last week too, which is, can we build something that those of us who are full-time staff and faculty and administrators, can we set some goals for ourselves for the next, 5 to 10 years that we can work on? And I think that it was affirming for me to hear that's something we're not going to ask our students to do all the work. They're visitors here, and they're here for a few years, and we want their input on what's going to be important for them. And so I think it is good to go and dig deeper and find out what they want immediately, and what do they want to see long term. What's going to make them a proud alumni 10 years from now, right? And what do they want to see that would be important to them, that would be validating to them and to their experience here. So I think we've got some work ahead of us.
And the future students that come in too, right? It's like what they say is also going to affects the rest that come after them.
Mm-hmm.
I want to just add too about, I'm glad you talked about this, because we've talked about this before too, treating everyone the same, and I mean, how can you make change or know your athletes until you have these conversations with your students? You don't know their needs. You have kids who come in from different societal levels. I mean, poor families, rich families, good schools, big schools, or even health issues. You have kids who come in, families have a brother or sister who has cancer, or they're dealing with their own challenges that they've had coming to college, and they've sacrificed so much. I mean, there's no way you can treat everyone the same. And, and kids from different, kids from Hawaii, I mean, it's different. And you don't know that until you get to know your kids and have these conversations. And so you have different kids, then you have to have more discussions. And I think that's real important, to have that communication and that dialogue and get to know your kids, period.
Well, even just like I feel like if I was a student, I'm not from this area, but I feel like I sense a tension if a kid's from Washington versus a kid's from Oregon. Like it's not the same. Like they kind of define themselves, I think, like differently, just like that, just like geographically where they're from, and just like you said with Hawaii, like it's like you don't want to discount any of their experiences. And so I think that and I try, and that's what I think we have to really strive for. It's hard because there's a lot of students and we have a lot of them, but we just, that's what we're here for ultimately, right? Yeah. Thanks, Doug.
Sometimes it's hard to get caught in the rut of coaching or teaching and planning and preparing, and then we forget about why we're here. We're here for our students. And that's why I got into education, because I'm here for our kids and been committed to them. And that's, whenever you have struggles or challenges as an adult or a manager or a coach, think about why you're doing it. Think about why you're doing it and why you're here.
I'm going to keep waving my hand.
Go ahead, Gary.
Get in here. One thing that I would like to share about all of this is that there is a sameness for me. And the sameness is that you should still treat people with respect. You should still treat people from a humble position. You should still treat them the way that you would want to be treated. That part, I don't think has to change. I think that you adjust the rest of it, true. And I agree with Doug completely about individualizing the approach. But to me, there's still a fundamental set of principles that need to kind of guide us in the way that we deal with people. And that is a sense of empathy. It is a sense of compassion. It is a sense of stepping out of yourself to try to understand where they come from relative to whatever you're trying to do. So, you know, I don't like the blanket statements. I know Doug hates infinity, words like never, always, etc. But certainly I think that adding the notion of the respect and empathy and that kind of thing within the context of that overall conversation helps it.
I agree. That's the basis of a cat chat right there, right?
Yeah. Yes. I wish everybody would remember that from the outside of us that throw barbs at us, but that's okay.
That's okay. We only require it when you come in, right?
Yeah.
So you all, I'm gonna jump in here. I'm Joe Wilforth. I'm the new dean for the College of Arts and Sciences, and new to Oregon, new to Linfield, of course. And I promise not to use this phrase often, but at my prior institution, we had safe zones, and there was safe zone training. And in my experience, faculty, staff, we had basically had an identifier on our name plate outside of our door, so students knew who had been trained, but who had self-identified as an ally and who had a strong record of allyship. And I wonder is there something like that here at Linfield? Help me kind of get up to speed. So I think this goes to a question that Jen brought up too. How do student athletes, all students, how do they know to recognize an ally? Does that question make sense?
It makes total sense. And I'm glad that you brought that up. That is an actionable item. I like that idea actually quite a bit. I don't know. What do you think, Nat, Jane, Doug?
Yeah, we like right now we have for the NCAA, there's a one team thing. So we have the one team symbol up, but there's not a specific training that goes along with that. There are various different trainings that NCAA institution employees can get and become certified at. But Gary, correct me if I'm wrong. I'm still fairly new here, Joe, too, myself. So I don't know do we have anything like that we've had a training for?
No, that's what I was shaking my head. We don't really have anything that has been solid about that. I think it's more or less that the students have had to try to gravitate towards somebody that maybe they feel safe with, and so on. But I think if we could be a little more or less forthright about that, and make it something that is accessible and much more accessible. And I agree that the one team, I know that made a difference right away to a couple of people recently, and you know who I'm talking about. But I think that this would be a fairly simple step too. Do you have, Joe, do you have any contacts or anything about the trainings that we could look into?
Yeah, I mean, the training included bias and implicit bias, microaggressions, as well as just what you said a moment ago, Gary, about just respecting the dignity of every human being, regardless of their appearance, their ability, their background. I mean, you name it. So yeah, that kind of training was what was involved, and it would be a series of workshops, a series of training exercises, and I mean, in my experience, it was eye-opening and revealing. I tend to think of myself as a very open-minded person and as a sort of generous individual, but I'm also keenly aware that my background and privilege is unique to me, and but it doesn't mean that incapable of empathy or incapable of understanding and appreciating people who come from different backgrounds and their experiences and their very real, very lived experiences. So yeah, I mean, I don't want to necessarily put you in contact with people I worked with previously. I mean, I would be happy to do that, but there are professionals, you know, all around the country, and most certainly in the region who can do that kind of work. And here on campus, I mean, I don't mean to suggest that we don't have very capable professionals right here. Some of them, I'm looking at some of them on screen right now. So,
right.
And Joe, I haven't got a chance to formally meet you yet, but welcome from one UTK to a UTC.
Yeah.
I've already had students come tell me like, the new dean, he's from UTC. Do you know him? And I'm like, I'm going to. So, but I love that. And I also think I'm in my second year, so I just started last year, but I think there needs to be something for these people, that this kind of training where we have to be aware of like what Esperance is doing and, you know, the student affairs, what athletics is doing, like, because I'm sure there's some faculty that have no idea, and we wouldn't know, because we know we have to go to faculty assembly, we know we have to go to, you know, a new hire thing, we know we have to go to all these things, but there's no one really making us do these. And I don't know if, you know, it's a actual requirement, but to get this kind of safe zone thing, I absolutely think you should be able to know, and like, you know, the health center, and just knowing all these resources, library, just knowing all these things that, because, you know, it's kind of like, you know, this is what I often say in the classroom, is like, I don't know, but I'm going to find someone that does know, or we're going to figure out how we can help you. So I think that would be a great part of this, like this kind of safe, or, you know, all in, we could maybe call it something all in related. But yeah.
Can I say something?
Yeah, Esperance.
Yeah, so sorry, I got ticked off and then I got back. So I may have missed the last parts, but I did hear the questions about the safe space and everything. And so for context, we used to have safe space. This is the old Linfield thing. So we've made this over the years, and this is through student affairs. And this has primarily been with focus on, you know, identity issues. And so this has been focused on identity issues and everything. And so this is down because we're a university. But then over the years, particularly like sometime last year, there was also debate about why you need safe spaces. The idea is every place should be a safe space, which means that on campus, I shouldn't just have to, and this is students bringing it up, I shouldn't just have to be in Melrose or whatever to feel like my identity is welcome there. And so even when you start looking at research and everything, there's a move to brave spaces as opposed to safe spaces, given what it defines. And I know the context is having people who are trained. And so even as we read what's coming out of recent research and the impact on people, and so they're like, okay, so if I'm not in Riley, then anybody can do anything to me right now? Like, you know what I mean? And so students think,
yeah, I have that conflict too with being when saying like the classroom's a safe space, because it's like this should all be safe. We should be safe all over campus. So I think we do need to like change whatever we call that. I agree.
And then because we're dealing with because several years ago we had all different generation, and now with the new current generation, it's like they are so, everything wants to be black and white and all that. And so while I agree with having these kinds of like we have a sticker for first gen because it makes sense, because it's okay, we're just a first gen, and I agree with having these kinds of notations, but I think the focus should be like what we're trying to do is to make sure that every place on campus is safe. Like I don't have, and we can maybe do identities where it's ally identities, say, okay, this person, like how we do for first gen ally identities. And so you're here, this person is aware of these issues, and you can just go talk to them without giving you a whole history of background of where you're coming from. And you can just sit down and tell them, hey, right now I'm going through this, and I don't have to ask you why you're going through it, because by knowing that you're a first gen, or by knowing that you're this person first, I know that you're probably going through that. And so I can directly support you. And that's part of the trauma piece that we're trying to work with, is that we don't have to keep being traumatized. So it's good conversation. I think the college, the university has room for growth with that, and we have ways to run with it. But just also being mindful of what that may bring if we start saying these spaces are X safe and these are not. I think it's how we communicate it, it's how we interact. I like the idea of having ally things, or saying, you know, every place is safe, but this place has this particular ally who is versed in this area, who's a basketball player who understands basketball, so you can go to them for all the basketball questions. They're an ally. But if you're in someone who knows football, they're still safe to be with, even if you have a basketball question. That's what I think we can work towards, so that everybody's safe.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Esperance.
Thanks, Esperance. Well,
I am gonna, I was thinking too, I was gonna stop the recording in case anybody wanted to share anything that they didn't want recorded. Are you okay with that, Jane?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.